IPMNation.com.
Aspect of that.
Horrifying.
This is something that I see a lot because I publish a lot in this field and people come looking for me. We now have documented evidence that people in hospice care are being placed on Tylenol or ibuprofen and denied opioids in stage 4 cancer.
It's unbelievable. It's torture. It's like obscenity.
Right, and let me make a kind of preface kind of remark, sort of not a sum up, but a statement of principle. And here's one that I'm sure I'm going to tick off a whole lot of doctors with. In my view, and increasingly in the view of quite a number of other fairly informed people who write about healthcare, the denial of opioid therapy to people in agonizing pain is morally and ethically wrong and medically inappropriate in all cases, without exception. And this is one where doctors will look at that and take a deep breath and, oh God, this guy's an idiot. But doctor, I'm telling you,
you're not.
You have to have a doctor or two in your audience. Is grow a freaking backbone.
Right.
They live in fear
because you're allowing yourself to be intimidated, and patients are dying because of your cowardice.
Right.
Maybe that's the point, right?
What do you mean?
Get rid of them.
You've heard me speak before, Matt, so you know I tend to get a little bit over the top now.
Well, no, but right. not without good cause. Absolutely.
My father was the toughest man I ever knew, and cancer at the end. You don't even recognize the person.
Yeah.
It's awful.
And
then
hear
to die in agony.
Don't recognize themselves anymore.
I mean,
let me draw on a little other background, if you might, here, and introduce some other subjects. By the way, are you getting any commentary yet through the Facebook page?
No, I'm still trying to get us on the Facebook Live. So right now, people are just either listening locally on 95.3 or they're streaming on WMNHradio.org, the audio stream. But we're still not broadcasting on Facebook itself. I keep trying about every 5 minutes or so to get us on. There's progress. More and more Facebook functions seem to be coming back online, but we're not quite able to stream yet on Facebook. But we're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's get into this and speak to a couple of other things now. It's wise for anybody in your audience not only to hear the limitations in my background, but to get an idea of how widely I talk to people. I have 2,800 Facebook friends. Don't tell me it's too many because there's always somebody coming in every day.
Sure.
I have 2,800 Facebook friends. I am a member of about 60 different Facebook groups with an aggregate membership of something over 50,000. When I tweet to platforms that get 200,000 impressions a day. And I have yet to see a posting from anybody who is themselves a pain patient who says, well, I get adequate treatment for my cancer pain by using ibuprofen.
Right, of course.
I haven't ever seen that. I've never, ever seen that. And the number of people I've talked to in the last 22 years is somewhere above 30,000 patients and caregivers.
By the way, when you say that, I can't help but remember it was Jeff Sessions, our former Attorney General, who very anti-cannabis and so forth, and who once said, "Yeah, if you have cancer and you're in pain, just take an aspirin." He literally said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, there are things I could say about the former Attorney General that you wouldn't necessarily want me to say on the air.
Well, you can say, oh, believe me, whatever you could say, I've said worse. As long as there's no profanity involved, you can let it rip if you want to.
Well, I try to avoid profanity, but I believe that in his case and in the case of some other people in the government, the temptation is really, really strong. But apart from that, and apart from kidding around about it, because I take this very seriously, as I think anyone who is involved in this field should.
Absolutely.
Right now, we've got a number of issues that are beginning to gel around a particular kind of forum that I've been very active in, and that has involved some public hearings on the part of a government organization. And I'd like to speak a little bit to that. I talked to Matt about this a little earlier when we were thinking about how to do this program. It turns out that in 2016, the Congress, in its somewhat debatable wisdom, chartered the Department of Health and Human Services. Those are the guys that run Social Security, among other things, under the CARA Act, and that is the Comprehensive Addiction and Care Act, I think. I'm not absolutely sure if I've got the translation involved, but it basically was an effort, an omnibus bill to try to start a whole lot of things that would help to get some better answers on addiction.
Yeah.
They chartered HHS to put together a task force, and the task force was to be named the Interagency Task Force on Best Practices in Pain Management. And they were actually given a fairly important charter, and that was to take a look at the existing practice standards that we have, and there are many of them out there from differing firms, differing organizations, most of them professional medical organizations, and to try to identify gaps, overlaps, and inconsistencies between the existing practice standards for treating pain.
Okay.
And that is a very worthwhile effort. And long about September, I guess, of 2017, the HHS people put out an announcement for folks to nominate themselves to the committee, or to the task force, I'm sorry. And then a few months later, they put out an announcement of who was going to sit on this task force, and there were 29 people. Excuse me. Some of them are from government organizations, like the CDC and FDA and NIDA and HHS itself and the Veterans Administration. And others of them are non-governmental public members who are experts in the field and in various aspects of the field of pain management. Now, I was nominated to that group by a U.S. congressman, but apparently my CV wasn't quite good enough.
Oh.
So I wasn't confirmed on it. But along about the time I started seeing the announcements, I decided I was going to get pretty active in this and start monitoring what they were doing. So
Right.
I went to their May 29th and 30th meeting in 2018 to give a 3-minute presentation there and to talk with the members of the task force, face-to-face, person-to-person. And I went again in September 25th, I think it was, of 2018, in their second public meeting. And I've been deeply, deeply involved in a process since September of commenting on, actually since December, I beg your pardon, of commenting on their draft recommendations to Congress. And I'm literally hip deep in this subject because unlike a whole lot of people, I've read all 100 pages of their recommendations and references. And on behalf of pain patients, what I've tried to do, and this is not just because I'm tooting my own horn now, I tried to do this because it needed to be done.
Yeah.
I tried to put together so that the task force could have an easier way through this mess, an integrated set of comments, not just you ought to do so-and-so comments, but a complete re-editing of their recommendations from the ground up.
Right.
And this is what a good proofreader does, and it's what a good research guide does. And I've done it in any number of other contexts that were not medical, because I did a lot of this kind of work for the government at one time.
What was, by the way, what they came up with? Was there a lot of repetition? Was there a lot of kind of the same conclusions that they were coming to? Did you see kind of a pattern?
Well, as a matter of fact, the recommendations they've put together so far in draft are one of the best and most patient-centered documents I have ever read.
Oh, wow. Okay.
because
Great.
they went out and they made very clear declarations in a lot of places, and they incorporated not exact quotations, but summaries of the input that they had in comments to the two meetings they had. And they incorporated the concerns of patients that were voiced to the task force during its meetings and in comments to its meetings. And these meetings were announced on the Federal Register, and they were advertised, and they were open for comment for like 90 days in each case. And patients had a chance to tell their stories.
Yeah.
Now, because there were so many stories, what the task force had to do was they got their IT experts together and they put together some word search engines to go through the input that they got back from the public, and to say, okay, what are the concerns that are being voiced here? And they got a whole lot of keywords involved, and then they analyzed how many responses they had on those keywords. And interestingly enough, one of the things they heard, and it is reflected multiple times in the draft guideline recommendations, is they heard the same story that your mother has been telling. And they heard the same story that people who talk to me has been telling. And the story is, the CDC guidelines have destroyed my life.
Wow.
And it really got to them.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not quoting now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Be careful. There's a distinction between what I say and what they've actually got written up.
Yeah.
But here's the drill now. What's going on now? Since December, there's been a 90-day comment period open. And anybody can comment. All you have to do is to go find the website that the Department of Health and Human Services has put together with their recommendations in outline. And there's a gateway at the Federal Register where you can go in and you can sign up, and you can either do it anonymously or by name. You don't have to provide a telephone number or your name if you're concerned about having it traced. And you can write in your own voice up to 5,000 characters. That's basically 3 pages.
Yeah.
An input that either tells your story or tells the task force what your concerns are. Now, I've done a little bit of homework on this to try to help people kind of focus on this. So there's another little thing that I'll suggest to your listeners.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to get an idea of what it might make sense to tell the task force, then do a Google search on the quotation, "tell the task force." That quote will pull up an article in National Pain Report that is a summary of the kinds of issues that it seems to make sense to tell the task force about. The task force is going to get a whole lot of life stories. And yes, people they desperately need to be heard. We get that.
Yeah.
But what the task force needs is a little something different. They need to hear from a patient perspective what has been done to patients and what is needed to fix it.
Right. Right.
And they have actually declared, and I've seen this from the people that were involved in these meetings, they've actually declared, we want to hear from you. We want to know what your situation is. We want to understand the directions that you're asking us to take in revealing the gaps and the overlaps and the updates that are needed with regard to the way you've been treated in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did when I did my line in, line out drafts to the folks was to say, okay, here's a collection of 38 pages of comments, 65 separate comments, and almost 30 additional references that you guys missed.
Yeah.
And I put it into their document in their editorial tone.
Okay.
So they don't have to go out and say, well, how should we react to all of this input? Even though I know they will, and they're going to make a good faith effort at it. I believe that.
That's good.
I really do.
That's good. That's encouraging.
But they've got an input that says, okay, here's a perspective that tries to bridge the gap between the stuff that Congress wanted you to say and the stuff that's truth. And I'm sure the Congress never intended to have the outcome that they're having, because one of the whole sections of the draft guidelines is a sections on the screw-ups that CDC did when they issued their guideline in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a term, by the way. Screw-up does not appear in the text as they issued it.
Right,
That's
right.
just what they did.
Right. Understood.
So there you are. We have an avenue. And if people want to have their voices heard, and if they're willing to go look up that term, ask the task force, you'll hear my recommendations for things that the task force really needs to hear about in your voice, in your own voice, either with your name on it or without your name on it. You can do it either way. It can be done both by comment to the Federal Register and by an email address, and that is Pain Task Force, all mushed together, at hhs.gov. That's not their preferred input, but whatever you send them has to be machine readable, because they're making a good faith effort to be sure that it all gets processed.
Okay.
Now, there's one thing you can't send them, and that needs to be carefully identified. Don't send them spam.
Right, of course.
Don't send them the same message repeated over and over. And for crying out loud, don't look up my input and quote it.
Right. Have people done that you've learned about?
Because I don't want to be spammed out of their system.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely.
And you got to admit, and by the way, here's the progress report.
Yeah,
we're about 3 weeks from finishing the comment period. It'll finish up on April 1st, and the Federal Register by itself has already registered 2,000 comments. And I have no idea, but I suspect it's an even larger number have gone in through the email portal. So these guys are getting an earload, an earful, if you will.
Yeah.
Trust me on that.
Yeah. Good. That's what we need.
So the part of what I'm saying to your mom and to the others who may be listening in on the program, and certainly what I would love to have heard once you've got the streaming audio put up, and you can send me a link to it so I'll be sure that people see it. One of the messages here is, finally, patients are beginning to be heard. Now, there's still an awful lot of counter-narrative. There's a lot of just plain damn stupidity operating in this field. If I ever wanted an example of government misdirection run amok, this one is a classic.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there who identify themselves professionally or financially with suppressing opioids. These are people that I think there's a special place in hell for.
Yes, I hope so.
That's a personal attitude, and I realize it may sound like an ad hominem attack, as the guys in the field put it, but that's a personal opinion.
I'm with you.
Because I live with pain patients every day of my life.
Yeah.
As somebody they come to and say, "Can you help me?" And too often I have to go back and say to them, "I'm trying to help change the public conversation, but I can't give you a doctor who will reliably take you at this stage, because doctors have been terrorized."
Right.
Now, news also, and I think I shared this with you in November. I'm going to do it again if you don't mind that.
Absolutely, yeah.
The AMA, in their House of Delegates meeting in November, that's the American Medical Association, issued something called Resolution 235. And there are quite a number of phrases, of whereases in this resolution. There's several different points. But when you walk through it, and it's not a terribly long document, but it's a really powerful document, because what it says is the CDC guidelines have been terribly misapplied. They were an attempt to give doctors some guidance on prescribing and on steps they could take to be sure their prescribing is safe.
Mm-hmm.
But they are not a mandatory practice standard, and they shouldn't be made one, because there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this problem.
Right.
And I've talked with by email with the lady who was president of the AMA at that time. I hope I'm not blowing her cover. She's been very gracious.
Okay.
She's heard my input.
Yeah.
And because she sits where she sits, she's very careful about what she says or commits herself to.
I'm sure.
And I completely respect that, Barbara.
Yeah.
If you happen to ever hear this. I do. I really do. I get it.
Yeah.
And she's made me no promises, but she's basically said, yeah, when we wrote Resolution 235, we meant what we said. And that is that the guidelines should not be applied as anything other than general guidance. And they should, above all else, not be weaponized, and that term is mine, not hers.
Right.
They should not be weaponized as a basis for state or federal regulation, because they are not applicable on a one-size-fits-all basis to all patients. And there are many, I think she may have used the term some.
Okay.
There are at least some patients who benefit from prescribing at levels substantially higher than those recommended for a safety review by CDC.
Yeah.
Now, I go a lot further than Barbara McKenney, and her name is almost unpronounceable. I'm sorry, doctor, I really am. McAnany, I think, is correct. But I go a lot further than she does, and then I go a lot further even than the published resolution does. Because what I say is you tried to be polite, but you basically repudiated the whole mess that CDC made out of this mess. And it turns out that one of the members of the HHS task force, who represents patients, not just doctors, this lady testified in front of the House Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee just about a month ago. They had a review session on, what's going on with regard to the access to opioids by people who need them versus what's going on in the issues on the opioid crisis. And they asked some very intelligent questions, and one of the questions they asked to her was, well, what do you believe about the necessity of providing guidelines? And this is not an exact quote. Her name, by the way, is Cindy Steinberg. I should credit her completely. She is associated with the U.S. Pain Foundation and is an advocate for patients and has been. She's also herself a chronic pain patient, and I've seen how it affects her. It's amazing what she does. What she said was, take this mission away from CDC. They don't have the talent for it. They screwed it up the first time, and they don't have an in-house basis of professional contributors. Give it to either the NIH, National Health Institutes of Health, or a special office that's already existing within the National Academies of Medicine, and have them do it over.
Right.
And that has been a major message from an awful lot of us out there. But there is a little, there's a wrinkle here. We got to be fair about this. One of the members of the HHS task force is from CDC. And you have probably got an idea or two about what their opinion likely is concerning having a CDC run out of town on a rail.
Right, of course, yeah.
It's not. Let us say they are not exactly embracing the position.
Yes.
There's politics here.
Right,
Clearly
of course.
There are politics.
There usually is.
So, you must have questions, and I've been monopolizing this and bending your ear something fierce. So let's let you ask a couple of questions and put some direction on this.
Sure. No, it's been really good. I think we learn a lot from hearing you talk about this. And of course, as you've been talking too, I've also been about every 5 minutes or so trying to see if the Facebook Live feed is up and running yet. And unfortunately, it's not. The Facebook is incrementally behaving a little bit better, but it's still not letting us connect, which is unfortunate because the last time that you were on back in November, we had a ton of people in the Facebook Live chat wanting to offer their opinions and ask questions and so forth. So I'm hopeful. We'll talk about it off air, obviously, but maybe we can do this again sooner rather than later, and hopefully we don't have the same technical glitch. But
well, yeah, okay. So given that we're not answered a whole lot of questions today. We're still about halfway through your 2-hour slot. So if I might, I'd like to offer a slightly different point of view that's part of the comments that I've offered and that I think some other people have offered to the task force, if it's okay with you.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so here's taking off at what might seem like a tangent at this point, but it's really very, very central issue in this business and or in this whole question and in the welfare of patients and the welfare of doctors. The regulatory environment, which is a big flashy phrase for what's going on with law enforcement and state regulators and everybody else. The environment has turned to crap on a stick in the sense that law enforcement and the DEA have, with knowledge of forethought in my belief, have taken deliberately provocative positions. And they've taken steps to try to suppress opioids by using any means, fair or foul. And some of the means they have used are a violation of law and the Constitution. And I want to make this really clear. This is a personal opinion, but it's one that is widely shared in patient communities. And doctors, when they're being especially brave, sometimes speak of it.
Mm-hmm.
The DEA and some state law enforcement and drug enforcement groups and many prosecutors have taken on what they think of as overprescribers. That's to say doctors who give out opioids carelessly and in huge volumes. And what they will do is they will get some reason, whatever it is, and I'm never too sure I know what it is. They'll get a reason or they'll get a complaint, and they'll go in and they'll start an investigation of the doctor. And what is the first thing they do? Well, if the doctor looks like he's got deep pockets, they'll confiscate his assets.
Oh, just like, civil asset forfeiture. Same thing,
Right, asset forfeiture. Well, guess what else they do? They will make a prominent announcement in public media that they are investigating this doctor for inappropriate prescribing.
No wonder they're all terrified.
What do you think that does to a doctor's business?
Oh, yeah. Yep, no
and
wonder.
Oh, by the way, here's another little thing they do. They will basically try to get the doctor to sign a consent decree without ever being evaluated in court, perhaps not even filing the papers in court until a prosecutor has, actually they do have to file papers in court. I'm sorry, that's an error. I'll fix this one. They may go in and confiscate the doctor's records.
Sure.
And make it impossible for him to manage the patients he's already got until he gets them back. The patients individually have to petition to the DEA to get copies. And this, by the way, is an accurate reporting. It's something that happened to one of the best doctors in pain management. His name is Forrest Tennant.
What a nightmare.
And the DEA and the local prosecutors did this shit to him.
Oh.
Pardon my French. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway.
We're on a delay.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm glad you bleeped that one.
Yeah, I had to. Yeah, that's all right.
They will confiscate the doctor's records, the medical records, and patients have to go back and petition to get them back. And then they will lock up the doctor's practice in an extended review of the records, and this may take months, even before any action is taken to prosecute formally in court. And while they're doing that, they're going to be coming back to the doctor's employees and basically telling them, you got to tell us about whether the doctor has been careless in his record keeping. You got to tell us whether the doctor takes cash for any of the prescriptions. And by the way, does he give out prescriptions or samples through his office? And by the way, if you don't tell us those things, we will prosecute you as co-defendants.
Maybe seize your assets while we're at it.
Yeah.
I'm sure that happens.
It's called suborning witnesses by official means. It basically says, we're going to go after you unless you give us something on the man who employed you.
Right.
Now, here's another little nasty, if I may, and this is one which I have published elsewhere, and so far nobody has come to my door with a subpoena. A little while back, I interviewed a gentleman who was head of the Ohio State Drug Task Force for some time. He was a commander in the Ohio State Police, and he's retired now from that and is still very active as a consultant. His name is John Burke, B-U-R-K-E. And he has a 40-year history in drug-related issues. He's also got somebody in his family just like your mother. And he published an article, and I forget in what, it might have been Pharmacy Times, I'm not sure, but he published an article about why don't we believe patients when they tell us that they're using opioids responsibly?
Mm-hmm.
And because that was a rather unique article from somebody with his background, I went and I looked him up, and I went to talk to him by phone.
Mm-hmm.
We spent, perhaps I guess it was over an hour together on the phone, and then I wrote up what I heard from him, and it was published. And the title of it, that article, if you want to see it, is A Good Man Speaks Truth to Power.
Okay.
And I asked him a number of questions. I said, for one thing, well, is there any curriculum or course that is taught to all diversion investigators who go out and investigate doctors for bad prescribing practices? Is there any uniform resource that people use nationally? And he says, oh, good Lord, no. There's no standard for this.
It's the Wild West.
There never has been a standard for this. There's no standard for investigative practice at all. Each state is different, and each prosecutor is different, and they make it up as they go along.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, well, all right. Now, here's another little indicator, and this is one that he offered me pretty much unsolicited after he figured out that I hopefully had my head straight.
Yeah.
Or on straight.
Yeah.
He said, one of the practices that's almost never really discussed or admitted to is that investigators for the DEA have nodded and agreed with me when I've asked. I think I'm being fair about this, John. If I'm not, you can tell me later. But what they've done is they've agreed with me on a kind of a nod, wink, wink basis that their yearly performance bonuses in the past have been tied to the volume of fines they collect from the people they investigate.
That's wow. Now that is that actually does surprise me, only because of how flagrant that is.
It does?
Yeah, that actually
it's flagrant, but it's not unique.
That actually does surprise me.
There was a scandal on this in the IRS for the same reasons. That scandal was associated with the selective investigation of nonprofits that were associated with conservative causes.
I remember
it caused quite a fuss before the fuss all died down.
I remember that story, but I didn't realize that there was almost like earning a commission.
Don't you understand? You can go after doctors, because they're a soft target.
Right.
The IRS always went after middle class people because they can't afford counsel.
Right.
It's worth it.
But I didn't know that there was a cash incentive for these employees. That's wow.
Well, it's a bonus.
Well,
a bonus.
Understand that is
their
an assertion
performance
that DEA denies.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they do.
They have been contacted by a couple of national editors, and they told the national editors, no, we do not generate bonuses on a commission basis. However, one of those editors has told me that he has filed a Freedom of Information Act request for any documents pertaining to the basis on which bonuses are granted to diversion investigators. And he did it months ago and has heard nothing.
Takes years for those lawsuits.
Yeah.
That one ought to cause us some cause to reflect, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, absolutely. Wow.
So let me draw this together then for your audience, Matt.
Yeah.
From that background, one of the things that I did in the combined line-in, line-out draft that I sent to the HHS folks which I'm sure is causing some of them to kind of take a deep breath and say, oh boy, now we do have a problem, is what I told them basically was that they needed to make a recommendation that amounts to speaking out of turn. Because even if they succeed in getting the CDC guidelines revised by the CDC, just the existence of a guideline that says there's a threshold of risk that you should really seriously consider not going above, that threshold in and of and by itself gives the DEA an artificial and unsupported criterion for persecuting doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've recommended is there's 4 points that I've recommended to the HHS task force. One of them is that they recommend to Congress that Congress direct the DEA to convene a task force of its own to write a unified national investigation standard for drug diversion.
We should
and to publish it.
By the way,
publish it in the clear to the public that says when we investigate a doctor or a practice or a pharmacist or anybody else, this is what we look for.
Red, we should.
This is the criterion that may identify someone as inappropriately handling these scheduled drugs.
We should clarify, too, for people, and I know we talked about it the last time you were on the show, but when we talk about diversion, what do you mean exactly in the legal sense?
Okay, so diversion is any practice that takes a drug that either was given to, prescribed for a pain patient, or that was supposed to be, and puts it in the hands of a non-medical user.
Okay.
There's an Office of Diversion Control in the DEA.
Okay.
And they do get bonuses. And they were having sex parties and all sorts of whoopee and doing all sorts of things.
Yeah, I saw the story from USA Today. You just texted me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so that covers 2 categories, though. Let's understand this.
Yeah.
You've got small-time diverters that basically are your 16 or 18-year-old who steals OxyContin out of your medicine closet,
mm-hmm.
or who buys it from somebody who got it from somebody on the street who paid somebody a few pennies on the dollar for stuff that he had stolen from a medicine closet.
Right.
These guys are small change. There's not very many of them. But then you got the big-time diverters that never get really prosecuted and never get really fined and never get really ever thrown in jail, and should be. And these are the guys that run pharmaceutical drug distributor companies, and I can name a number of them, that know where all the drugs are going by zip code and even by prescriber, and who could, if they wanted to, detect a pill mill in a second flat,
mm-hmm.
and don't. These people are unindicted co-conspirators with pill mills. And the only reason they aren't prosecuted is that they're billion-dollar companies, and DEA has told its investigators they're too big to prosecute.
Wow. Okay.
Also, former DEA agents work for some of those companies.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Nothing.
No.
Yeah, there was a series now, correct, so I guess it's almost 6 months, almost a year old now. 60 Minutes and the Washington Post did a series where they interviewed DEA field agents who had found what they thought was evidence of pill mill activity that the pharmaceutical distributors, and for that matter, the pharmaceutical companies themselves, should have known about but did nothing about. And what the investigators told 60 Minutes, and you can look this one up because I'm pretty sure it's still available online, and the Washington Post article for sure is, but what they told the investigator was that they went to their prosecutors, and their prosecutors said, well, if we try to prosecute these people, we'll tie up this case in something as big as the big tobacco scandal. We won't get rulings that we can stand, and it'll be the only thing we do for years. We can't do that.
Wow.
Now, the real reasons are not the ones that you'll necessarily hear, although their implication is certainly there in the 60 Minutes series.
Yeah.
The real reasons for this, the real reasons why the prosecutors didn't prosecute, are that the companies quietly went to them with a nod, wink, wink, and said, "What are you planning to do after you retire from government service? Have you ever thought about becoming a lobbyist?"
Oh, you mean like Kevin Downing, Manafort's lawyer, who used to be IRS, and was a prosecutor.
Right.
Or
There you go.
Now,
yeah.
Realize I'm drawing this picture large.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily being kind to the DEA here. I don't think they deserve kindness, frankly, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
I'm making some generalizations, and before they can really be actionable in some way where our government can go in and do something about them, there's going to have to be a lot of legwork here.
Mm-hmm.
On the part of government investigators who are treating other government investigators and basically digging in to find the trail of breadcrumbs. There are almost certainly going to be a trail of breadcrumbs, and it probably starts with talking to the investigators who interviewed with 60 Minutes and the Washington Post.
Yeah.
But I don't think their complaints have ever been actually addressed in some serious way by Congress.
Well,
the House Senate Judiciary Committee tried to invite the director of DEA to talk to them about legislation that the Congress had been criticized for because it apparently made things a little easier on the drug distribution companies. And guess what? The head of the DEA basically sent an underling who wasn't authorized to say anything, and he got away with it.
The system protects itself. I mean, that's what happens really when you have government. When you have government investigating government. The system protects itself. It's very much a closed loop.
Right.
It's like the thin blue line.
And the DEA
large.
is probably the most closed and isolated government agency in law enforcement that we have.
Yeah.
And it funds a substantial part of its operations from property confiscation.
Yeah, I know someone who's a friend of mine who's a former DEA agent who today just totally opposes the drug war. He says it's a farce.
It is.
Yeah.
So let me go back to this question from a different angle, then, if I can.
Yeah.
And this again is for those of your listeners. The first thing I mentioned there, of course, was the possibility that we need a national standard. Another thing that we need to do, and this is something that HHS needs to recommend to Congress, and that is DEA needs to be directed to do an analysis of county-by-county opioid scheduled drug distribution to detect counties where usage is so high that it doesn't reflect local medical markets. And it would have to be done with some subtlety to be good, to be useful. But because you got situations where sometimes there's a lot of deliveries to a pharmacy that's in a different county from the medical center that they typically service. So you don't want to go out and say basically, any county that gets a huge amount and doesn't have a medical center in it is automatically a pill mill factory of some kind.
Right.
That isn't where you ought to be going.
Right. There might be logistical reasons. Yeah.
With reasonable care.
Right.
It is possible to analyze patterns of prescription and drug delivery in ways that should highlight places where pill mills should be looked for. And if you do that and you get some answers that are sensible, and it says, okay, here's maybe our top 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 counties in the country where the volume doesn't look like it matches up too well with the medical market. That's where you put your DEA investigation resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fairly explicit in my recommendations to the task force on that issue. Now, a third point. One of the things that they need to recommend to Congress is that they direct DEA to cease, halt, and desist from setting opioid production volumes based on DEA's assessment of which drugs get diverted. because DEA is not competent to make that assessment.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done the analysis that would support it. And even if they had, the diversion would be corporate. It wouldn't be individual. Pain patients don't divert their meds. What are you people thinking?
Right.
So, that's not quite the way I put it to the task force, that's for sure. These people are either going to love me or hate me before we're done. But I'm about as plain as the nose on your face when it comes to a lot of these issues.
The world needs more of that.
But, I think we do. We need more of it on the part of government servants, too.
Yeah.
Believe me, I've got a list of complaints that's longer than your arm on that count.
Yeah.
But the part of this that I'm suggesting there is we really do need to tell the DEA to get out of the business of setting quotas and let the market do that.
Yeah.
One of the things that's happened because they are setting quotas is that hospitals are having to switch between their primary and most useful opioid anesthetics into less useful or well-known anesthetics in surgeries.
Really?
Prescriptions are in shortage all across major areas of major states because pharmacies can't get them.
Okay.
And patients are going untreated or badly treated because of it.
Now that's a part of this whole thing, a component of it that I hadn't I wouldn't have even thought of. That's interesting. Huh.
Well, DEA actually announced publicly, and I have to tell you on this, it's one of those things I didn't have time to completely follow up, but they announced publicly the intention to begin establishing production quotas, which they do have the authority to do by law, by the way. They are authorized. They set the production quotas.
Okay.
But they announced the intention to begin setting and altering production quotas based on their findings that certain drug types were being diverted. What they never told anybody was how they were going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that happened months and months and months back, and I don't know what the outcome of that has been, whether they have actually put that on hold or not.
Okay.
They should have. I'm not sure they did.
Right.
And it might be an interesting question for a congressman to ask them in public hearings, if they will.
Right.
And then there was a fourth note, basically, to say where the issue is concerned. Unless the DEA and state regulatory authorities relinquish the standard setting process for scheduled drugs to doctors, nothing will change.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how good or how patient-centered the recommendations are to Congress. If DEA is left in charge, we're sunk.
Mm-hmm.
And if DEA is left in charge, I can guarantee you that tens of thousands of patients will die.
Mm-hmm.
That's an absolute predictable outcome.
Yeah.
And they will die from undertreatment, from medical collapse, from hypertension, from stress, and occasionally from suicide. We already know that's happening.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been stories locally that I've read and heard about of suicides. And my mother too. I mean, she was in so much agony at one point. I mean, she's doing better, but she still doesn't have what she needs. But I had a conversation with her that was pretty scary. Like I said, that's why this whole topic has become really, really personal to me.
I can count the number of people that I've talked to, basically communicated with by email mostly, and a few of them by phone. I can count the number of people in the last year that I've talked with who are in your mother's situation in the hundreds.
Yeah.
I'm only one worker in this field.
Right.
Doctors are hearing the same story. Medical boards are hearing the same story. And state medical boards are falling down on their duty to patients because they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. John,
they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk.
Right.
I, dealing with a cancer patient at the end of his life, I had to hide a pistol.
Oh, my God.
Because he was ready to the pain.
Yeah. And by the way, too...
I've talked with a lady who survived somebody in that situation.
Wow.
He had a long history of deeply damaging physical trauma that was being managed on opioids. He was coerced into tapering back. As soon as he started tapering back, he started getting breakthrough pain. His doctor refused to hear that he was getting breakthrough pain. His doctor told him, "Hey, look, I can't go on prescribing at this level. If I do, I'll have DEA in my hair. I can't afford to lose my livelihood."
Yeah,
so the guy referred him to another pain management specialist. The pain management specialist said, "I'm full up. I don't have any appointments in a year and a half. I can't see you."
Yeah.
The only option they offered him was to go to the county methadone maintenance program to receive methadone treatment, to receive methadone treatment for pain. And by the way, methadone is authorized by FDA as one of the pain treatments.
Right.
When he went to the program, they told him, "I'm sorry, you're not an addict. We can't see you."
Oh, they wouldn't even help him. Oh, my God. That's nuts.
And at the end of this, when his wife and daughter were out of the house on an errand, the man took his pistol, went into a garden shed, and blew his brains out with it.
Yep.
God, it's heartbreaking.
And I talked to this woman, and we were both in tears.
Yeah.
You can't give heroin to cancer
This
patient.
is an avoidable death that should be put at the feet of the CDC and the regulators that have taken the CDC guidelines as standards.
Say the politicians.
Oh, yeah.
They're the ones that play with people's lives.
Absolutely.
We saw it here during a Senate and a gubernatorial in the Senate, the twin campaigns. It's who can I'll just say DEA, the other candidate, right?
Well,
you know who can be tougher on all this stuff.
Right, exactly. Well, that's what I said, and I said this to Red last time in November. It's the thing is, politicians always have to look like they're trying to do something,
particularly when they've done nothing.
Right, and it doesn't matter ultimately because there's a certain sociopathy to political ambition. to be quite honest,
I like
psychopathy when you get really
sure, absolutely. So they have to look like they're doing something. That's how they win re-election. It doesn't, in the end, it doesn't matter if what they're doing actually does more harm than good. All that matters is how good does it look in a campaign ad,
on a circular being sent
or
out.
on a circular. Yep.
And remember, we had the spice epidemic. Yeah. And then there was all sorts of
I
stuff
got a
till
couple
they
of little
settled on
slogans I'll add
opiates.
as a point of small levity, if I may.
Absolutely.
Robert A. Heinlein, who is famous for his science fiction writing many, many years ago, and I'm not sure which
Stranger
one
in
it was.
a Strange Land.
Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He wrote, "There is literally no problem of daily life that cannot be made worse by making it a matter of public policy."
That's true.
Right.
And they'll seize
and
everything.
Will Rogers, 100 years before that, made the remark that it seemed to him that it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to send a whole new crop of bright young men to Congress to do jobs that nobody should ever have given them in the first place.
I like that one. That's pretty good.
Well, Nipsey,
although it's levity, there's a certain truth in this.
There is.
One of the things too that has gone on, and I got involved in this one somewhat personally because I was supporting some people involved in it. There was an attack made by letter from Senator Wyden.
Oh,
I met him. Senator from Washington.
Ron Wyden, yeah.
And he wrote a letter to the director of the HHS task force, and basically said, several of your members have had long-standing relationships with pharmaceutical companies and should never have been confirmed as members in the first place because they have financial conflicts of interest. That at least was the position that he took. And he demanded all kinds of feedback from the task force in its work.
Yeah.
To basically prove that their medical professionals weren't being bought by Big Pharma or anybody else.
Ron Wyden's one of the only whistleblowers.
There's an interesting irony in this. And if anybody on Senator Wyden's staff is listening, this is public information. It's not an insider's view. Senator Wyden is one of the largest recipients of campaign contributions from hospitals, insurance companies, and nursing homes in the country.
Follow the money, always.
Follow the money.
Always. That's always the answer.
He's the ranking member of, I believe, the Senate, I want to say Judiciary Committee, but I'm not absolutely sure that's true. It's one of the major committees that gets involved in these issues.
Yeah.
So what we got there was what appeared to be naked self-interest and naked service to big money contributors operating, because I don't think the hospitals much like some of the things that the CDC, or excuse me, that the task force has put forward.
Right. By the way, just interject. Jenny just sent me a message. She's listening. She said, this is one of the few things on Facebook that's working correctly right now is Messenger. She said, I'm seeing more suicides in RSD and CRPS support groups because they can't access pain meds now and they don't get ketamine infusions for a choice. People from other states are coming here to see my doctor to get the infusion therapy to stop themselves from killing themselves. Remember, they call it the suicide disease, neuropathic dystrophy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's a very representative message, because I get ones like it all the time.
I can imagine. Yeah.
What I basically have said, and I've said this in published work as well. My message to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and to HHS, and to FDA, and to NIDA, is we can't wait anymore, people. You have to take a definitive position, and you need to do it now. And that position is that the government at federal and state level will cease, halt, and desist from trying to discourage the prescription of opioids, because they are safe and they work.
Right.
You aren't going to see the presidential candidates traipsing through here talking about that.
No, they will not. They will not.
Matter of fact, that's one of the horrible factors here. Pain patients are not really great at advocating on their own behalf, because many of them are hurting so bad that it's hard to talk.
And they're addicts.
They certainly don't show up in protest parades, although we're trying to make more of that happen. There's an outfit called Don't Punish Pain that is trying to build demonstrations in all 50 states eventually. I think they're probably active now in about 20 or so. And it's really, really hard to get people to drive any distance to demonstrate in front of a government office or in front of Congress or anywhere else. They hurt too much, and they're broke. And they're broke because the government forces them to pay for too much of their own treatment.
I assume, by the way, you saw the article online about the woman who testified before Congress. When was this? She testified while lying on a cot because she's in so much pain.
Did.
She can't sit up.
That is the lady I referred to earlier.
Okay.
Cindy Steinberg.
Oh, that's her.
She's a member of the task force.
Oh, she is? Okay, interesting. Yeah, this was back on February 12th. It's NBCnews.com has the story, but a lot of places do. But, yeah, I mean, and sadly, I hate to say it, but when I saw that picture of her lying there, she's literally on a cot before Congress testifying. I immediately thought of my mother, and what she's going through.
Here's something not in any way in defense of Ms. Steinberg. She's a very competent individual. I would not presume to speak in her behalf. I don't need to. Her message is loud and clear and extremely well-grounded and well-rooted. There was an article written, and I forget the name of it, except that I think it was one of the various blogs that's very active on this that is really saying, well, all pain patients are addicts. Who the hell do you think is kidding?
That's their
editorial position.
They want more.
But when they saw that video clip on Cindy, somebody wrote an article that basically said, "Why do you let this woman get away with such theatrics?"
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
They went after her as if she was faking it.
Since
That's
she was
awful.
Paul Manafort.
And apparently that was what seemed to get some attention in the audience that they were interested in attracting.
Oh, my God.
Pain patients get this kind of nonsense all the time.
Yeah.
I have lost count of the number of patients who have told me, when I came into an emergency room asking for Demerol because I was at the edge of blowing my brains out, a nurse told me, "We'll go over and sit down, we'll get to you eventually," and left me sitting for 4 hours.
Oh, I've seen
and
that.
Would not talk to me when I asked for help.
I've seen that kind of
And
scenario
then
up
told
close.
me I was a drug seeker and I should go see a local addiction center.
Yep.
And I'm not making this up. I've had that talk with more than one patient.
I've seen a similar situation up close with someone. Yep. Oh yeah.
Oh, geez, I was going to be. Oh, let's not get into more. It's ridiculous.
So I guess what I'm coming to in all of this discussion, and this is something I'll repeat because I think it bears repetition. To the doctors and to the regulators, it is now crystal clear. Prescribing of opioids by physicians to their patients is not now and never has been the source of our opioid epidemic.
Right.
Yeah, but that's not.
And I can prove that using published figures of the CDC.
Yeah, of course you can.
What we are dealing with in the people who claim that there's a connection is a combination of very bitter families who refuse to take responsibility for not knowing what was going on in their adolescent's head when he went out and started stealing and or using opioid prescriptions to get high.
Right.
That's a little piece of it.
Sure.
It's not a very big piece. And I know that when a kid screws up that way and becomes addicted, it's a tragedy. I do not in any way denigrate that.
Right.
But there are families that are so dedicated to the idea that it wasn't their fault,
right,
and nobody could have seen it coming, that they'll make that leap.
Yeah,
and
they scapegoat.
Say, well, you know, he had a tooth taken out, and they gave him a bottle of Percocet to take home, and he was addicted in 2 days.
Right.
And that ain't so.
Yeah.
It isn't so, and we know it isn't so. Now, that's one thing there. But on the other side of this, I've actually worked with the data that the CDC publishes in their CDC Wonder database, and the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality publishes in another database. I forget what they call it, Topic, I think. I've worked in detail with 17 years of that data.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the help of a business analyst by the name of John Allen Tucker, who is not a pain patient, and he doesn't have one in the family that I know of. He just got curious. And he went in and he looked at this data, and he started putting it together, and he said, well, I wonder what would happen if you built a graph, and on the horizontal axis of the graph, you try to plot the state-by-state rate of opioid prescriptions per 100. And prescriptions means, actually made by a patient and tracked in the medical records.
Okay.
So this is nobody's made-up number.
Yeah.
This is what CDC uses to figure out who's getting what. You take that set of data and you plot it on, with the vertical axis being the rate of death for all causes related to opioids, an opioid overdose.
Okay.
What would that look like? What would that chart look like? Would it be a line? If it was a line that rises from left to right, where if you increase the rate of prescribing, you get an increased rate of opioid overdose death, that would pretty much prove that opioids are at fault, wouldn't it?
Well,
that's
yeah,
that's what we tried to look into, and what John Allen Tucker looked into. Only when he actually did the plot,
it was flat, right?
There is no straight line in it.
Yeah.
It looks like somebody hauled off and took a shot with a 20-gauge shotgun at a barn door.
Oh, it's random?
The splatter in that data has no cause and effect relationship whatsoever.
Right, cause and effect. That's when you have use statistics to lie. You ignore.
Well,
you
yeah,
ignore
and
cause and effect.
what's happened
Right.
here, and this is the really interesting part of it. This is the scandal.
To talk.
Is I've gone back with a series of letters to the CDC people who are charged with evaluating vital statistics data. I tracked down people. I actually went through the CDC info gateway. I did a series of 11 letters to them. I got back one response from some fellow who basically said, well, we already know the answer to this, and it isn't the one you offered us. And they refused even to give me an email address to send the data to.
Wow. No kidding.
They don't want to hear it.
Right.
They're running away from it.
Right.
Because what this data shows is that overprescribing did not create the opioid crisis and is not sustaining it. Opioid prescribing is such a small factor that it doesn't even move the freaking meter.
Right.
Yeah, but people know know that. And then all of a sudden it's all just thrown out the window. And it was just incredible where they got the research, making all these connections. It was like overnight. And it overturned a whole generation of research. It's incredible.
Yeah, what happened was they allowed junk science to get into their business, and they made the biggest mistake of all. They said, well, for the last few years, the rate of opioid prescribing has been climbing when, the big bad pharmaceutical companies got away with marketing OxyContin.
Oh, yeah.
And it has more than tripled since 2001. And, by the way, at the same time, the rates of opioid-related mortality have been rising significantly. We're now seeing so-called 70,000, that's a number they quote, 70,000 drug-related deaths, and then you get into the details.
Mm-hmm.
What the CDC and others have said is, well, if prescribing is rising and death rates are rising, then prescribing must have caused death.
Right. There's no illegal.
It is the classic policy that says if A follows B, then A caused B. And it's wrong.
Yeah.
And anybody with science training knows that it's wrong.
It's handy politically.
Since 2010, the rate of opioid prescribing has dropped by a third, while the numbers of opioid-related deaths have continued to rise.
Yeah.
So there's no cause and effect on that.
Right.
There's a few other little nasty, inconvenient facts, too, if I can share them with you.
Oh.
We're not quite at the end of the program.
No, absolutely, yeah. Share away.
When you look at the data that CDC keeps on who gets prescriptions and who has problems with opioid-related deaths, there are two different groups of people. The seniors and people over age 50 are prescribed opioids about 250% more often than people under 30.
Okay.
That's expected because, we have problems with pain that tend to build over time.
Right.
And older people have more prescriptions for every kind of medicine and for pain medicine, too.
Yeah.
That makes perfectly good sense. But there's a nasty little other side to this. The rate of overdose-related death in seniors has been stable for 17 years. But in minors and young adults, it has skyrocketed, and it is now 6 times higher than the rate in seniors.
Wow.
So what we've got is demographics that says the people who are getting the most prescriptions are the people with the lowest rate of opioid-related
Interesting.
death.
Interesting, yeah.
There's another stat that comes into the same picture. And by the way, all of this is published in extract. I'm trying to get a couple of other mainstream journals to take it on, and they're fighting me tooth and nail. Another little thing is inconvenient, and this we know from multiple sources. The typical new drug abuser is an adolescent or early 20s male who has a history of family disruption and stress, often due to economic problems and economic stagnation, particularly in places like West Virginia. who often has a history of difficulty of one kind or another, sometimes mental health related, sometimes minor crime related. It varies from person to person. And that cohort of people, by the way, is probably the most medically underserved of any population. That's your typical new addict, or if you will, new substance abuser, let's be fair.
Okay.
The term addict, some people have a really hard time with.
Sure.
I understand that.
Sure.
A person with addiction is a person, first of all. I get that.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you ask yourself, who's the typical chronic pain patient? The typical chronic pain patient is a woman in her 40s or older by a ratio of at least 60-40.
Okay.
And for some kinds of problems, it's by a ratio of 20-80. Excuse me, of 80-20.
Oh, okay. Wow.
That woman who in her 40s or older is under a doctor's care for pain is, if her life is stable enough to see a doctor repeatedly, she's almost never going to be an addict.
That makes sense.
Her exposure to medical opioids is not even a risk factor.
Mm-hmm.
You can't find it.
That makes sense. So, yeah.
So the message I've been speaking, and by the way, I have spoken this message in person in front of the HHS task force. I got some really startled expressions when I told them what the shotgun graph looked like.
Mm-hmm.
But I made this message to them, and the message was, guys, the CDC's own data contradicts the entire basis for the CDC guidelines.
Right.
Because the CDC guidelines assume that there's some threshold of risk where if you prescribe a patient who has pain, more than that, you're going to cause them to be addicted. And that's not true. And we know it's not true. And they know it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
So basically, the case can be made, and it has been made in multiple publications. There was one particularly good one by a fellow by the name of Martin, his last name, and it was in Pain Medicine, which is a major and very creditable journal. What he said was the CDC guidelines basically were corrupted by improper internal processes, taking as assumptions things that were not true and that somebody, if they'd had any background, would have known were not true, and magnifying the effects, the presumed effects of opioid prescribing, using the fallacy that because there's more prescribing and there's more death, that death was caused by prescribing. He basically laid it all out, and he also showed just how rigged the internal process of the consultants group was that the CDC hired to come to that answer.
Right. Wow.
The director of the CDC was, in a sense, in bed with a group of people that probably nobody else had ever listened to before. Their name is the Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing.
Okay.
And one of their founding members was a very close friend and a former employee of Tom Friedman, who at that time was the head of the CDC, and several of their people contributed to the initial writing on the guidelines.
Tom Friedman, the same Tom Friedman we see on cable news, and he's a columnist and everything. Same guy, or
it might be, but I can't tell you for sure. I don't know the man personally.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's also the same Tom Friedman who is facing charges of inappropriate sexual behavior, I might add.
Oh, great.
That's come out since he's left the CDC.
Okay.
I don't know what
You're
exactly
thinking
what
of Thomas Friedman.
I did see a splash in the news.
Okay.
That was one of those things that pain patients basically rubbed their hands over and said, "See, we knew it."
Right.
But that's another matter. And that's also not very fair to Dr. Friedman.
Yeah.
But
Tom
the
Friedman,
implication
different.
was, and it was an implication that was pretty well supported,
CDC, yeah.
was that Tom Friedman set out to find a way to restrict opioids, and in league with a doctor by the name of Andrew Kolodny, who was a key figure in PROP, and by the way, who was at that time a partner in a national chain of addiction treatment centers called Phoenix House. They set out to find a way, by any means fair or foul, to suppress opioid prescribing, and they did it after the FDA turned away the petitions that Prop tried to feed them on at least major elements of the petitions that were intended to enforce black box warnings on opioids of all kinds. And FDA turned them away and said, basically, much of the claim you're making in your petition is groundless. So they tried to find a way to end run the system.
Mm-hmm.
It actually got so bad that some of the meetings of the consultants group were held in private, despite the fact that there was a law in force. It's called transparency.
Right.
That they're required, whenever anybody advises a government agency, their proceedings are required to be published.
Yeah, but you have to be prosecuted.
And they have either forgotten or decided not to issue minutes on those meetings.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't even really want to submit their guideline for review by the public.
Imagine that.
They put it up and they said, okay, 3 days, get back to us. And the Washington Legal Foundation went to the House Oversight Committee and said, this is a big-time no-no. This is illegal. And the Oversight and Reform Committee, wrote back to Tom Friedman and said, you ain't going to do it that way. You're going to open this up for public comment for 90 days. And very gracelessly, Tom Friedman allowed that to happen. They
Right.
got thousands of comments, many of them from agencies and academies that were of medical professionals. And if you read the draft and you compare it to what they eventually published, they completely ignored every piece of input they got.
Oh, great.
So what
goodness.
you have in the CDC guidelines is a standard that is so fatally flawed that it cannot be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
It is incomplete, it is biased, and the bias was deliberate and it was detected by others. It makes claims that opioids are ineffective and totally ignores the fact that 1.6 million people that are maintained under Medicare Part D are prescribed them at doses exceeding the level established by the guidelines.
Right.
1.6 million people contradict the crap these people published.
Exactly.
How could it be ineffective when we evolve with opioid receptors in our brain, and not just one either?
Right.
Because different ones
That's a good
get
point.
affected by different drugs.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Opioids operate in several ways. I don't have all of the chemistry of this in my head, but the bottom line to this is that as I understand it, and as I think this is based on some serious study, first of all, there is no one-size-fits-all opioid patient either, because opioids are broken down into components that have to cross the blood-brain barrier and go into the brain and operate there. And they're all broken down in the liver. And there are 6 enzymes in the liver that do this job of breaking up an opioid into its component parts. It turns out that there's a genetics behind those 6 enzymes. And the genetic is not uniform. You can have people who break down so little and take so long to break down an opioid that not enough of it actually gets through the blood-brain barrier, and you have to boost the doses by huge amounts, even to get enough there to make pain or to make it go away.
And it works.
And you have others who are hypermetabolizers, who generate so much of those byproducts so fast that they're at risk of overdose.
Right.
And unless you do the genetic testing, you won't know what you are.
Yeah, I remember.
I know.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that last time. Yeah.
My mother and I take after her. For if it was one pill, it'd be half for us. But my stepmother was part Native American. She would have to have twice the dosage. She was a cancer victim too. But
I am in direct communication with a family in whom the And I've talked with these people at length. I've talked with them in social settings. It is not something where you have to go see somebody who's in bed. Somebody who's had really severe pain for 20 years and more and been treated for 20 years and more. This fellow, and I'm not going to name him because I haven't got his permission, this fellow takes 2,500 morphine milligram equivalents per day, and he's awake and alert.
Yeah.
And he's cognitively functioning, and he can hold a good conversation and do it in a rational way. And it controls his pain, but it's never completely gone. Now, on the other hand, doctors have been alerted by a safety alert from the FDA that says, be really careful about giving tramadol or codeine to pediatric patients. That's kids.
Pediatric. Okay.
Because some of them who hypermetabolize it may be at risk for overdose, even on minimal doses of those two medications.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a published safety alert that FDA did years ago.
Yeah.
But FDA has never generalized that to multiple opioid-type medications.
The idea that everybody's the same.
Science is just emerging. Go ahead.
The idea that everyone is the same is ridiculous.
Right.
I remember I had to abstract a pharmaceutical industry newsletter in the 1990s, which, hundreds of dollars, and it's talking to them. And they told physicians, this was at the time, probably right after tobacco was won, that lawsuit, well after Dalcon Shield and that they should don't give generic drugs to people that aren't of Northern or Northwestern European heritage. When you had people that were Jewish or Italian, Southeastern Europe, which were the other big ethnic groups that weren't, like European, they might, it might have a different effect on them.
Sure.
It has to do with,
this
there's
is
all sorts of
interesting
stuff.
because there is a real problem that doesn't happen to be opioids.
But it was to avoid
there's a real
liability.
problem with some
generics
ethnic
have
populations.
The way generic
with a problem
works.
that is called, I want to say, Scogan's syndrome. That's not the correct one, but put it this way: there's about one South Asian in 1,000 cannot take anti-seizure meds at high doses because he will be lethally allergic to them.
Right. I don't know about
and
that.
this kind of overreaction, the drug reaction, can put somebody into anaphylactic shock and close their throat in minutes.
Oof. Well, it's scary. Yeah.
So in that case, there is a grain of truth in the concern.
Well, most of the drugs were created either in Switzerland, France, or the United States at the time, and the people they used as their test subjects were Northwestern Europeans. And it was just the thing to keep yourself from getting sued if somebody was going to hit you on a lawsuit over generics. Because a generic can have a different way, like the capsule, the pill. It can be different, and you can get stuck.
Right.
There's all sorts of things that happen.
They
said be safe by prescription, non-generic.
We gotta start to wrap up because Red, we're already approaching the top of the hour. We're gonna run out of show. So before we do, and like I said, I'd love to have you back when apparently it's a worldwide Facebook blackout. It's global. Jenny had sent me an article, so I wonder if Facebook got hacked. Instagram is also having issues.
Joel.
So it's too bad.
Joel gets back and look what happened.
Oh my goodness! So it's too bad we weren't able to have the interaction on Facebook during the show today, Red. So if you will,
do it again.
If you will, we'll have you back. Like I said, sooner rather than later.
Come on my show.
John does a show. Maybe you could go on too. We'll connect you guys. But before we wrap up, do you have a website that you want to mention where that people can go to and keep up with what you're doing and your advocacy, or any resources that you want to mention?
And
okay.
Thank you for asking.
Absolutely.
You can find me in a very easy way. If you'll do a Google search on the quoted phrase, the Lawhern files.
Okay.
Spelled Lawhern. It'll bring you to an archive of much of my recent published work and a few videos. And, by the way, it'll bring them to the audio for the interview we did last November. And I hope to add this audio to the same.
Yes. Fantastic. All right. Well, Richard A. Red Lawhern, PhD, thank you so much you've been very generous with your time, hanging with us for the full ride, and we really appreciate it. Like I said, we'll talk offline and get you back on soon, and hopefully we won't have these Facebook issues again. But I'm sure I will send you the link to the audio as soon as it's posted, and I'm sure you got a big following, a lot of people paying attention to what you're doing, and are very supportive of it. And I'm sure they'll tune into the archive, and we will go forward from there. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been wonderful.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of people in pain.
Absolutely,
it's not about me. It is about them.
Absolutely. All right, Red. Thank you so much, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. All right. So that was like I said. We'll share the audio out. Never did. I was trying like every 10 minutes or so to get on the Facebook Live, but yeah, there's some sort of global issue.
Yeah, Zuckerberg's being taken down. Maybe it's the president has under his powers. Remember, one of them was the internet.
Oh.
He doesn't like Zuckerberg. He doesn't like anybody.
That's right, yes.
You see, Manafort's been indicted by the Attorney General, the DA of Manhattan, Cyrus Vance Jr., I guess state of New York. I think it's maybe just Manhattan,
One way or another, he's going to be in prison for the rest of his life.
New York State, but he's the DA of Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
Or it's Kings County. But, yeah, they're going to hit him with a bunch of stuff, including mortgage fraud.
Yes.
And Kevin Downing, who used to be in the Justice Department, the tax division went after Brad Birkenfeld, the famous guy who turned in all the tax cheats, including somebody that we can't talk about that's in the news quite often.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
He said when he left, you heard it, 2 cases, no collusion. And the judge said nothing. She said there is no she talked about the collusion because it had nothing to do with it, that case. That's one's coming up because Mueller's probably might hit him with an indictment, too.
Right.
Jeez, Matt. The fun just goes on.
It does. What an amazing time to be alive. Well, thank you, Jon Hopwood. Thank you again, of cource, to Red. We got to get out of here. Yeah, absolutely. If you miss any part of the show, it'll be up in just a little bit at WMNHradio.org. And no Facebook Live video, guys. Sorry. But, yes, Zuckerberg. Someone is trying to take him down, I think. All right. Yes, the president. All right, so we'll talk at y'all a little bit later. Bye, everybody.
IPMNation.com